We have the approval of the agenda first. I have a motion from Councillor Pleshy, second by Councillor Dillon. The agenda for the special council meeting of June 26, 2019 be approved as published and circulated. All those in favor? Motion carries. Now we have a motion from Councillor Dillon, second by Councillor Pleshy, to hear the delegations. We have the list here. Jaskaran Singh Sandhu, Executive Director from the WSO, Mustafa Farouk, Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, Father Roman Galza, the St. Elias Ukrainian Catholic Church, and Randy Kerman, President of the Har Tikva Congregation of Brampton. We have a request from Father Roman, who has a scheduling conflict, if he could go first, if we could just amend the order with Council's indulgence. Thank you, Councillor Pleshy. All those in favor of hearing the delegations? Motion carries. Okay, so our next declaration of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, we will move to delegations. And Father Roman, you'll be up first. We're having the special meeting on Quebec's Bill 21 and ways that Brampton can respond to this intrusion on religious freedom. And for those watching at home, this bill prohibits individuals that work for government in Quebec, if you wear a cross, a kippah, a turban, a hijab, any religious artifact, that you cannot work for government there. And we welcome the delegations today. And Father Roman, I'll verify with the clerk, how long do we have for each deputation? Up to 5 minutes.
Up to.
Yes.
I'm a preacher, that's a bit difficult for me. However, I'll try to keep it brief. I don't know whether do I read what I prepared? I'll try both, okay? Because really, I feel like I'm among friends. Patrick,
yes.
Nice to see you again. Pleshy name, worked with Paul one long time ago. Doug, your father and your mom, very warm place in my heart. And even I've got Mr. Councilman Medeiros is here. I taught you.
Yes.
I feel like I'm right at home. Your Worship, Patrick Brown, Mayor of Brampton, Honourable City Councillor, citizens of Brampton and friends. I thank you for the honour of coming before you to speak on behalf of my Christian community concerning this Chamber's motion to challenge Bill 21. My name is Roman Galadza. I'm pastor of St. Elias, the Ukrainian Catholic Church out on Heritage Road, the church with the domes on it, and have been so for 43 years. That's longer than some of you have been alive, so I feel quite elderly here. When I first came to Brampton in 1976, the city limits seemed to begin at Shoppers World. There was one light between Mississauga and Shoppers World, and that was on the 401. Things have changed, okay? They went north to Vauden Street with Kennedy Road Tabernacle with a purple cross that really shone in the evenings there. On the east, it was the Bramalise, was a planned community on the east, and in the west, we had McLaughlin Road, which was a 2-lane country road at that time. Everything beyond those parameters was farmland, and I wish I'd had the foresight to buy some of it, as we all do, I think. The population at that time was approximately 55,000 people, a tenth of what it is today, and most of them were typical Ontarians in 1976, except I sometimes thought myself. I remember going to the bank downstairs at the Four Corners dressed like this, a cassock, hat, cross, beard, a visible minority of one back then. 43 years have passed. Brampton has boomed in size and population. Much has changed, but you can still see me on occasion down at the bank in cassock, hat, cross, and now a white beard, but no longer a minority of one. And that's good. There was a time earlier in the last century when it would have been difficult for a newcomer to this city. In Toronto itself, I could have been arrested for going out in public dressed in this fashion. The experience in my community has been that the stories are there. The first ethnic minorities coming to Ontario like this, a little small town Ontario, would have to anglicize their names in order to become accepted, especially in the business world. Lozinski became Lawson if they wanted to have a pharmacy. The story of the first Catholics, even here in Brampton, to trying to purchase land where St. Mary's is here now with Father Sullivan. Look into it and see what difficulties they had. It wasn't always. So the good old days were not necessarily always so good. Fortunately, times have changed, and cultural and religious differences are not only welcome, but celebrated in today's Canada. And so I stand before you today, speaking not only on behalf of my Ukrainian Catholic community, but also on behalf of the countless people of faith separated from us by time or distance who are not blessed as we are here. The discussion today is important. For those people, near and far, I offer my gratitude and support to your noble motion. In preparing for this, I asked my advisors at the parish if we can come up with something, and this is what they said, and I'd like it to go on record. To suppress people's religious freedom is to suppress the people themselves. After the right to life, the right to religious belief and expression of that belief, and this includes people who have no religious belief, agnostics and atheists. This right is absolutely fundamental. A truly secular society, not a pseudo one, would respect this and not align itself with an anti-religious stance. Our rights are not impinged by Muslim women wearing the hijab, by Sikhs wearing turbans, by Jewish men wearing the yarmulke, or Christian clergy wearing a cassock or a clerical collar. Bill 21 in Quebec is plainly disrespectful of persons as persons, for it requires them to be anonymous in the public square. It demands that they be not themselves. Respect for the religious beliefs or non-beliefs of other persons does not mean agreement with them, but it does mean listening to and understanding them. How can I possibly understand my neighbors and fellow citizens if I create a law, such as Bill 21, that suppresses and excludes a person's most basic understanding of who she or he is? Once religious rights and freedom are diminished, democracy becomes a sham, and the state becomes an oppressor and is on the rise to tyranny. This is not what Canada should be about. Canadians can show the world that we can live with and celebrate religious diversity. The state has no place creating religious wedges between its citizens under the pretense that religious symbols are divisive. We don't need to fear one another. What we need to do is love one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Roman. Thank you for your words. I asked questions. Sorry, Councillor Santos, question for Father Roman?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Father Roman, for coming in to delegate today. I do have one question, and that question is it possible that there are residents here in Brampton who have family members, sons, daughters, parents, brothers, and sisters who are affected by Bill 21 in Quebec?
In Quebec, not family members, no. We do have communities there, but I'm not familiar with what they are going through. But I would imagine they have great concerns as well, since they share the same sort of cultural expressions that we do here in Ontario.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next delegation is Jasper Singh Sandhu, Executive Director of the World Sikh Organization of Canada. Welcome back to City Hall, Jasper.
Thank you, Your Worship. Much like the Father, I know many of you here, some better than others, but probably not as long. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Jasper Sandhu. I'm the Executive Director with the World Sikh Organization of Canada. And it is a little odd to be standing here and delegating. It's been a while since I've done this. Unfortunately, the circumstances under which we are here discussing this today are actually quite dire. In our humble opinion as an organization, a crisis in our country. We're dealing with a situation that's unprecedented. Bill 21's infringement of not only the Canadian Charter, but of the Quebec Human Rights Charter and international norms. It is egregious. It's taking condemnation from the UN, out of all places. So what we're dealing with is quite dire, and there's a little frustration from ourselves at the WSO, and I'm sure from other organizations, about the lack of urgency from our federal government and from other places and other institutions across the country and treating this like the crisis it is. And it's happening in our own backyards. And while it's great that we can denounce human rights violations in places like Saudi Arabia or India or China, it's a completely different thing when it's happening here in our own country. So this is a Canadian issue, which is why I'm thankful to the City of Brampton, to yourself, Your Worship, for raising this issue so fearlessly and ensuring that the City of Brampton plays a role in addressing this issue. And some people may wonder, what role does the City of Brampton have to play with this, right? First of all, we're a municipality. We're not in Quebec. We may not have the largest French population. The reality is the City of Brampton can play a leadership role. And this council has already proven that by marching in the Pride Parade, which we applaud, by engaging in hard conversations about the diversity audit at the Peel Police Board, about the Police Services Board motion that just happened, I believe, earlier this week or late last week. And Ron Chutt is sitting here, and we applaud his work as well on that, as well as your seconding of the motion, Your Worship. So the City of Brampton has a role to play in being a catalyst and acting as an inspiration and as a leader on this issue for other levels of government coast to coast, whether that's municipally, provincially, but most importantly, the federal government, which has a more direct play here as far as jurisdiction goes. So we're in full support of the motion with an addition of this is also a moment and an opportunity and a catalyst for introspection here at the city. We are a community where I think believe it's 75% or close to visible minority. That is not, and when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, that is not always reflected, whether that's in our police, whether it's the fire services, whether it's here at City Hall or in our bureaucracy. And that by no means is a knock. It is, I think, a challenge that we should step up to and tackle that. And we can show places like Quebec that not only are we willing to talk the talk, we're willing to walk the walk. And I think that speaks volume just as much as this motion does, just as much as it does raising flags outside, just as much as it does for a lot of other things that we're doing, just as much as it does that Police Services Board motion from last week. That is a physical manifestation of what we're just discussing here today. And we have the audit at the police board. We have many examples. This debate has been going on for years. And I look at the city council in front of me. And it gives me immense pride when I'm working in other jurisdictions across the country. And everyone talks about, quite frankly, our councils don't represent the diverse communities that we serve, whether that's Mississauga, whether that's Surrey, whether that's Edmonton. I'm able to hold my head high and say, as a resident of Brampton, I have a council that made history, right? Our first Black councillor, our first Filipino councillor, 2 turban-wearing Sikh councillors. This is testament to Brampton being willing to always take the lead. And I'm hoping that Brampton steps up to the plate and takes the lead, and not only with this motion, but taking this as a moment for introspection and igniting another catalyst and completely changing the way our institutions look so that they represent, they look like the community they serve. That is the greatest message you can send to the folks in Quebec. That is the greatest source of inspiration you can give to the folks that are being impacted and their lives are, quite frankly, being ruined by the discriminatory Bill 21. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Just Karen, for coming here today and presenting your view. Recently, the City of Brampton had the opportunity to open a park in honor of the memory of the events that happened in 1914 around the Komagata-Maru, which itself was given rise to by unfair, unjust, discriminatory regulations. What parallels do you see between that type of regulations, which was essentially veiled, a veiled attempt to apply a discriminatory law to this legislation, which is attempting to prevent individuals from being able to participate fully in the society there?
Yeah, Bill 21 is not only discriminatory, there's a fair argument to me that it's racist because it is targeting certain races, right? The Sikh community for us, our religious symbols are quite frankly not symbols, they're an extension of our being. For those that are initiated in the faith. Now, myself, I'm not initiated into the faith fully, But for folks like Gurpreet, Councillor Dillon, or some of the other people that we come to know very well, whether it's NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, whether it's Innovation Minister Navdeep Bains, that are initiating into the faith, those symbols are actually extensions of their human being. So it's unfair to suggest that, well, you can take the symbol off and therefore you can work. The Common Maru, it's an interesting story because the same military outfit that stopped the ship from boarding was the same one that now Defense Minister Sajjan led when he was in the military. Which says that if we're willing to step up to the challenge, we can absolutely change the way our country functions. We can absolutely change the way that it behaves. And that takes leadership, right? And that takes someone that's inspirational and willing to be a pioneer to change the way things are done. And in my humble opinion, it's this city, right? This is a city that's brought maybe one of the most diverse city councils to board. Your worship, I look at your office, it reflects the city. And those are personal decisions you made in your own hiring for your political staff. These are things that our city does extremely well. And this leadership exists at the top. We need to percolate all the way to the bottom so that we can become a beacon on the hill for communities across the country, but especially Quebec.
Thank you. And I think that, here in Canada, some still haven't learned the histories of the lessons from history here. In your opinion, for those who practice the Sikh faith in Quebec, for this legislation to be applied to them, and for those Sikhs who live here in the city of Brampton, how are those who live here, how are they affected by seeing this legislation enacted in our country, even though it is in another province?
I think there was immense pride in the community, especially in 2015, where you had 4 Sikh ministers, you had about 16, 17 Sikh MPs go. There was a sense of pride in the community that we made it, right? We worked hard. The amount of sweat equity we put into this country for the last 100 years is prevalent, and it's frankly, and the proof is in the pudding. So the community felt that if there's anywhere in the world where we can hold our heads high and practice our faith without fear, it's Canada. So for this to happen in Quebec, it sparks a certain level of fear in the community that, well, there's nothing really stopping any other jurisdiction from doing this, quite frankly. There's nothing stopping Ontario or Manitoba or BC or whatever it is from enacting a legislation similar to Bill 21 and then coupling it with the notwithstanding a clause that overrides the notwithstanding clause, and there you go, who cares about the Constitution? So for folks here in Brampton, the Sikh community is, I think, almost 200,000 in Brampton. It's roughly a third, if not a half, of the Sikh population in the country is either in Brampton or the Peel region. For us, quite frankly, as a Brampton resident, like I'll take off my WSO hat or turban. For us, the city of Brampton doing this shows us and tells us that this city cares about our people, that it cares about our identity, and it respects our place in Canadian history in building this country as citizens here. So being able to do this here in this province or in this city not only sends a message to people in Quebec, it sends locals here that, hey, don't worry about it, this will never happen here.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, one last question along the lines of what Councillor Santos asked the previous delegation. Are there members of the community here in Brampton, of the Sikh community, who would have family members in Quebec who are directly affected by this legislation?
Yes, yeah, without a doubt. Actually, a lot of the Sikh community, before they came to Ontario, actually landed in Montreal, or they started in Montreal. And if that Sikh community stayed in Montreal and never moved out, the largest Sikh population would actually be in Quebec. And there's always been an exodus of sorts from Quebec to the English-speaking Canada. It's only escalated now. The WSO has been advocating on this issue for the last 3-4 years, actually. We did a press conference with the city council in Montreal asking the Montreal police to change their practices to ensure there's diversity in their ranks, which is why I kind of go back to that statement I made earlier. If you don't instill this culture in your institutions, it can very quickly escalate to what we're seeing in Quebec now. So they never had the culture in the institutions of reflecting the community they serve. It became very easy for the government to turn around and be like, well, we're enacting this legislation, who cares if it's discriminatory, because it only impacts a handful of people. Which is why it's important that we instill the culture to the very bones of, in this case, this municipal institutions and agencies of the municipality.
And I think it's just important because what this shows, as I mentioned before, is that some haven't learned from the lessons of history, and it's we need to remind ourselves how important it is for organizations like yours and so many other people to stand up for these causes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jaskran, for your time here today. And I would
Thank
know
you, Worship.
you'd be happy to know the city has already started the process of looking into a diversity and equity audit here. I think there's going to be an update to council at our next council meeting, and hopefully we'll be starting in the fall. So great things, as usual, are happening in Brampton.
Happy to hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Worship.
Next up on our list is Mustafa Farouk, Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims.
Thank you very much. My name is Mustafa Farouk. I am the Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Unlike my two distinguished colleagues before me, this is the first time that I'm meeting many of you. I hail from a small town in Alberta that boasts the largest ratio of horse to humans in Western Canada. So it's a real pleasure to be here in the Flower City, and thank you for inviting us, and thank you for having us here. So the purpose of us being here today is to bring your attention to one of the biggest civil rights challenges of our time, and it's a challenge that you're all recognizing by inviting us, and that is the passage into law of Quebec's Bill 21. It was not long ago that we fought for the right to marry between races, religions, and orientations. It wasn't even that long ago that we had to fight for the right of women to vote. These hard-fought battles for civil liberties are a fundamental part of our identities as Canadians. However, on June 16th, the Quebec government took us backwards. As many of you know, the Quebec government has restricted the wearing of religious symbols in several public sector jobs. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. That means, as my colleagues were mentioning, that right now, when Jews, Sikhs, Muslims, and those who are of Christian faith, for many of them, they will wake up in the morning, every morning, to a different set of opportunities than everyone else in Quebec. We have legitimized the very thing that we have fought for decades to overcome: discrimination and second-class citizenship. And we all bear collective responsibility for that. The new law in Quebec ensures that Canadians do not come to work with their full selves, in their full creativity, and in their full richness. Instead of forging forward into the future with our invaluable diversity, this law creates workplaces that are dysfunctional and hostile. It will create workplaces in which colleagues are supported by the law to snitch on each other for wearing a hijab or a turban. A place where teachers from religious minorities will feel bullied into changing who they are in order to feel accepted and to go about doing their jobs. Today, our beautiful country is facing criticism from the United Nations for Bill 21, and the world watches as Quebec makes some of our most vulnerable populations even more vulnerable as they stand to lose their jobs for expressing something that they and we thought we had fought for and had won: to be welcome and to be free in Canada. We need to collectively stand against this assault on our civil rights across race, across religion, across provinces, across municipalities. And that's why we thank the City of Brampton for standing in solidarity with us, and that's why we're asking that the City of Brampton adopts this motion with the notation that the City of Brampton supports in principle our legal challenge. We thank the City of Brampton sincerely for standing up, and we know that the City of Brampton is not alone. We know that the City of Montreal and others have spoken out against Bill 21. We know that there are school boards and other municipalities in Quebec that are standing up. We at NCCM, with our Quebec office, are standing up. We're standing in solidarity with other folks who are Quebec-based and who have organizations and folks on the ground in Quebec, like the World Sikh Organization. But as we lead our advocacy efforts in Quebec, we appreciate sincerely the City of Brampton standing with us. So subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your delegation today, and welcome. There's this, just hearing the three delegations in general, including yours, I'm reminded of a very common phrase that is used heavily in the climate change discourse, which is think global, act local. I think that in situations like this, while people question whether or not the city of Brampton should be involved in this type of discussion because it's outside, per se, of our jurisdiction, you know, it isn't, because it hits very close to home. And if we are going to be proactive on a lot of these issues, we actually have to, as Jaskaran and yourself are saying, act very locally. And so consistent with all the questions we've been asking to the previous delegations, I wanted to also ask you whether or not there are residents here in Brampton who also have family members in the community who are impacted by Bill 21.
Almost certainly. Almost certainly there are folks in Brampton who have family members or close friends or colleagues who are directly affected by Bill 21.
Thank you very much.
See no other speakers. Thank you for your time and for joining us here today. Lastly, we have Randy Kerman, President of Har Tikva Congregation of Brampton, on behalf of Rabbi Mikhail Shekel. Is Randy not here? Okay. On that note, we've concluded delegations. And so we'll go to the first discussion item, which was moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Harkirat Singh. If we could put this up, because it has been amended. To make sure the wording is correct. And if I could speak to that, and thank you for Council's indulgence of having this special meeting today on this topic. Some people have asked, why in Brampton are we taking such offense to what's happening in Quebec? Well, we're ground zero for diversity. We're ground zero for multiculturalism. We're the most diverse big city in Canada. And if the most diverse big city in Canada isn't going to stand up for diversity and multiculturalism, then who's going to? It's like in a schoolyard. If you see a bully, it's easy to turn an eye, but it's another thing to point out when there's something egregious happening. There are many reasons we live in the greatest country in the world. And here we are a few days before Canada Day, and one of the things we always celebrate about Canada is that we are a mosaic. It doesn't matter where you're born. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter what God you worship. It doesn't matter who you love. Everyone has equal opportunity in this country. Everyone has equal opportunity in our city. And the notion that in Quebec, if you wear a turban, a kippah, a hijab, a cross, you couldn't apply to be a police officer or a crown attorney or a nurse or any government worker is creating a smaller pool of talent. What I think is great here in Peel, here in Brampton, is we're saying the bigger the competition, the bigger the tool, the better talent you're going to get. I couldn't imagine in Quebec, if you're saying you have to choose between your faith and your work, there are many people who are going to say, I'm not going to give up my faith. To say that you can't apply for a job if you want to wear a cross or a turban or a hijab. Think about that. The pool is shrinking. And I think we're the opposite here. This motion is about suggesting that we stand up for our diversity. To say it shouldn't matter what God you worship. It shouldn't matter. Frankly, it's none of government's business what your faith is. And this draconian bill in Quebec, I believe, is an offense to Canadian values. It's an offense to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It infringes the basic principle, the freedom of religion. And this motion, and thank you for Councillor Singh for seconding it, is an opportunity to say we stand shoulder to shoulder with those in Quebec who find this to be trampling their rights, their individual rights, their freedom of religion. And the wording is support in principle, to show our support for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and NCCM, and to have a staff report back on ways that we can be supportive. And I realize this is a case that they're taking up on behalf of Canadians who profoundly believe in freedom of religion. And hopefully this is a challenge to other municipalities to say, support these organizations standing up for freedom of religion. Support this fight for this basic Canadian right, this basic human right, freedom of religion. And I know we have two motions today. This is the first, to say that we support in principle the legal challenge. And hopefully we can see a wave of municipalities supporting this noble effort by NCCM and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And hopefully that wave we've seen started in Brampton. And like I said at the beginning, we're ground zero for diversity. If we're not willing to stand up for diversity, then who is? I know we have a number of speakers on the board, and so we'll start with the seconder, Councillor Singh.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Brown, for bringing this motion. I particularly admire your support and enthusiasm for all communities, but particularly in this incident. So I remember when, because Jaskar's here as well, we went to the monk school and we met a pretty renowned academic. And he had tremendous global experience. He was actually transferring to Oxford or Cambridge, I forgot which one. And I was there talking, and we were talking about other cities. We're talking about London, we're talking about Berlin, New York, and Los Angeles. And he'd always bring it back to Brampton. And I'm like, why is this academic so interested in Brampton? There's so much happening globally. And when we honed down and asked him and clarified, for him, Brampton was the bedrock for inclusivity and diversity in Canada. It was a petri dish of multiculturalism. That's what the old term was. Now we refer to it more as diversity and equity. And if it fails, or if it weakens in Brampton, or stops working, its ripple effect will be felt throughout Canada. And that's why he was saying it so importantly, and even globally, particularly now in a time where you hear the conversations and the rise of the alt-right and right-wing movement. We live in scary times. And in Brampton here, we have seen it, and we do see it. Diversity and equity as our advantage. We see it as a sense of pride. And when our fellow citizens, whether they're just citizens of the country, whether they're our family, their friends in British Columbia or Quebec, face discrimination, we as Bramptonians should and do need to stand by. And so far, we have been standing by various communities. We just approved a transformative Indigenous motion last week. We stood up for autistic parents. I know the mayor has been a champion of parents who are going through the cuts right now in autism. We marched in the Pride Parade, and we must stand against discrimination and just go beyond statements and social media posts. So I'm happy to hear that we're supporting the legal challenge. We're going beyond just social media posts and making statements. And we're doing it at a time where some in the political arena are still silent and staying silent. So I hope this sends a strong message to various communities that Brampton stands with all communities, and I hope to have my peers support this motion as well. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Mayor. Very, very eloquently put by Councillor Singh and the Mayor, and all I'd like to do is request a recorded vote.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. Councillor Frattini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for bringing this forward. And Councillor Singh, just sorry, it came off the board there. I just wanted to ask one question.
You should still be on the board.
Came off. There goes. At the bottom there, the last paragraph, in support and principle, the joint and legal. I just wanted to clarify what that means. Challenge, the legal part. I think joint was crossed off.
Yeah, so it's support and principle rather than join. So the word join is removed.
Yes, and anyway, thank you for bringing it forward. I believe in diversity here, and this is why Brampton's good, regardless of the color or religion. And myself as an immigrant, and we should support all mankind. Thank you for both of you for bringing it forward. And I was going to ask for a recorded vote. So, thank you, Councillor Bowman.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Councillor Singh and Mayor Brown, this motion is exactly what we need to be doing all across Ontario and all across Canada. You know, I'm so frustrated. I feel frustrated and extremely saddened that we are, 2019 and like having to be faced with this bill. I just wonder what's next. Are we going to bring back gerrymandering? All these types of bills do is reinforce racism and discrimination in Canada, and we need to be moving past this. We need to be pushing back against this. We all mourned openly the mosque shooting in Quebec, and if we don't fight against this bill, and if we don't show our disgust in this bill, how many more memorials are we going to be having? How many more? And I'm so disappointed that it's 2019 and we're having a discussion on this. We need to be opening doors. We need to be sharing. No faith encourages hate. No faith. And why not have the freedom to express our faith, a faith that encourages opening our doors and loving each other and breaking bread? That's what we do in Brampton. And I really hope Quebec is able to see that they're moving back in history, not forward, clearly. And I'm very disappointed. So I fully support this, and I'm looking forward to the next motion because, Brampton is a mosaic. We have open doors, and we want to encourage people to come here and feel safe here. And we do not condone racism and discrimination against faith, religion, beliefs, and so on and so forth. We want to open our doors. So I'm grappling with feelings of disappointment, sadness, and frustration. But, we will heal when we come together and we say something and we push back. And so I'm very happy that we are showing that we are supporting, in principle, this fight against religious freedom. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I think many of my colleagues have already expressed the importance and regarding the solidarity and the importance that this has for communities. But I think, and you had mentioned, Mayor, at the beginning about us looking internally on what we're doing regarding this, because I do think that this really ups the game and gives us more of a sense of responsibility to be that example and really reflect those Canadian values of diversity and multiculturalism. So I do think that, the motion speaks and is very powerful, but I think at the same time as an organization, it's a call to action. And we've talked about this and I know we're constantly striving to be better, more reflective, more diverse, but this certainly does put the onus on us, and the gauntlet has to be set down to sort of say, as we go on supporting communities, we want to ensure our communities here feel that they're being reflected and being supported right here at City Council. So I commend the Mayor's leadership. Councillor Singh, thank you. I know many of my colleagues who maybe, even though their names are not on this motion, have been on the forefront of really pushing the diversity agenda. And I know staff have done a great job really trying to look at everything we do across the city in terms of our business operations and really understand what the City of Brampton is and our operations. But I think we have to keep striving towards that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Medeiros. And I would note, just this weekend, actually, we had the Fire Academy. And thank you to our chief, who's and Deputy Chief Navjot, for taking this initiative. This Fire Academy is about getting out into the community, letting people of all walks of life, of all faiths, of all cultures, of all backgrounds know about how you can get involved in a career in firefighting. We know that we have work to do in some departments in the city to reflect that mosaic, and I think the firefighters deserve kudos for actually really taking this seriously. And if any member of council hasn't been to one of their fire academies, it's something wonderful to see. And as I mentioned earlier, we will get an update next week on what we're hoping to do with the diversity and equity audit. It's something that our senior staff are taking very seriously. And the updates I've received, I'm going to make sure that all of council receives at our next council meeting. We're certainly going to lead by example here in Brampton. Our next speaker, Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, just where it says support in principle, the legal challenge against, I think we should add against the discriminatory freedom of religion bill, or Quebec's, try to word it properly, because it says the legal challenge against the freedom of religion proposed in Quebec's Bill 21. If we can add in there against the discriminatory bill.
I can say against the discrimination of freedom of religion. That's a good point, Councillor Dillon. I think in the wordsmithing we missed that. Okay, Councillor Willens.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for bringing this forward along with Councillor Singh. And thank you to the delegates for coming to speak today, especially Father Roman for reminding me how old I am. And for it does bring back memories, actually, when I was a child growing up in Brampton. In the 60s, we had a lot of the immigration coming in from the European countries, and then gradually as I went through high school, there was a lot. So I stayed in Brampton. I think I stayed in Brampton because how diverse Brampton was and how welcoming we were to other countries around the world, and how it built this city. And it's a great city. Obviously, if I didn't like it, I would have been gone a long time ago. I'm 59 years old now, and I'm very proud of this city and the way it's come, and I'm very proud of this council for bringing things like this forward to show our support. I know there's other legal actions and everything else, but I think just to show our support, it's important to let other communities around the country, around North America even, to let them know that we stand for a diverse and vibrant city. So thank you again for coming in, and I do want to come and visit you at the church. Councillor Palashi and I, and Councillor Bowman would like to come as well. He's another lifelong resident of Brampton.
Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say that I recall, I don't know what day it actually was, but I was sitting on my couch, I was playing with my son, I have the news in the background, like I usually do, and I remember hearing this and just kind of laughing, because I actually thought it was a joke. I actually thought that something like this can't happen, not in Canada. It's ridiculous. This would be saying to Joe, your suit's blue. We don't allow that. Sorry, you can no longer work here. You can't wear blue suits. It's ridiculous. Absolutely, it's insanity that this is actually happening. I am completely lost for words. I know as a politician that that goes against one of the rules, but I am absolutely, I couldn't believe that this was happening. I thank members for bringing this forward. Jaskaran, thank you very much for coming here today. Father Roman, I'd love to see you guys here more often, not just when stuff like this happens. I know the passion that you guys have for Brampton and you know where you are in your lives and what you're doing is so important to us here in Brampton. I would really like to see you more often and hear from you more often, and not just around something like this. But I'm glad that we're here together, banding together to say to another part of Canada that this is an abomination. This is ridiculous. It's insane. I would ask that I know that you have a mover of the motion and you have a seconder of the motion, and symbolic, I would request all members of council second the motion.
The clerk also note. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed that there are a few more media folks up there in the gallery on this particular issue. And so I'm going to highlight again that this is, even though a global national issue, it's about thinking globally but acting locally. And certainly the residents in Brampton embrace diversity because you see it in their elected officials and the people that they have voted on this council. The City of Brampton is taking a lead on acting locally on this issue, as the mayor had said, giving a recent example of the Fire Academy weekend that just happened that I was at, where the fire emergency services are doing proactive and innovative outreach into the community to attract more diverse members of the community into the fire department. In addition to that, the mayor and this council has led a record number of flag raisings and cultural celebrations within the halls and on the grounds of City Hall. And so at the local level, we're already doing things locally in addition to supporting this motion. I think we're probably going to have unanimous support for this motion, and it's just another example of how our city is taking the lead on issues related to human rights and standing up for what's right in our country and in our city.
Okay, well, thank you, all members of council, for sharing your perspectives. And before we call the question, and it'll be a recorded vote, I just wanted to say one quick point. On May 27th, Councillor Dillon, Councillor Santos, and Councillor Vicente joined me to go have a dinner. During Ramadan, we were in Quebec City for FCM, and we went to the Saint Foy Masjid that suffered the terrorist attack, where we lost 6 members of their masjid. Everyone remembers that horrific terrorist attack. It shook us because you see these scenes on the news, but you're not used to seeing it in Canada. And when we were there, one of the members of the masjid said to me, you know, there are times we've felt like we didn't want to live here. We got yelled at for wearing, our wives got yelled at for wearing a hijab. I felt like moving. And he joked, he said, maybe we should move to Brampton. We were telling about our outdoor iftar and how we're such a proud, diverse, multicultural city. And my response to him is, as much as we love you in Brampton, you need to be in Saint Foy, you need to be in Quebec City, and you'll see progress there over time. You'll see that appreciation for diversity that we have in Brampton. But my last word to him was, Canadians stick together, and that we support you. And they actually took the Brampton flag and they put it up at their masjid. And this is an example of Canadians supporting Canadians. We stick together, and if one Canadian is bullied, we stand with them. So on that note, we'll call the question, and it's a recorded vote.
Recorded vote's been requested on the motion on the screen as amended. All in favor, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Dillon, Councillor Singh, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Williams, Councillor Medeiros, Mayor Brown, Councillor Bowman, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Willens, Councillor Vicente, Councillor Santos. Mr. Mayor, the motion carries unanimously 11-0.
Okay. Our next motion on the same topic, but we have a revised motion. I'm going to ask the clerk to put it up. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Santos. It's a little bit broader than the original motion. Do you have the one that was amended by Councillor? Is this the amended one? Okay. So this is, originally it was just fire and emergency. It's just in general to say if you're considering a career in different municipal services. And I'll just speak to this briefly to explain it. Last week at the Peel Police Board, we passed a resolution saying that the world is welcome in Peel to compete. We don't want to have a smaller pool. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and we want a competition. And that if you're an officer in Quebec who can't apply for the police force, apply in Peel. And it's not to say that there's anyone jumping the queue. It's not to say that you don't have to earn that job through merit and competition, but it's saying that we're an inclusive society, that we're an inclusive community. And frankly, that's always been our way in Brampton. We advertise, we post jobs that go country-wide. And this is another symbol of support, in support of the diversity we cherish in our cities. So just to be very clear, this is not about queue jumping. This is not about it not being merit-based. It's actually the opposite. In Quebec, they are saying, if you wear a turban, if you wear a kippah, if you wear a cross, you can't apply for that job. You have to choose between your faith and your work. We're saying the opposite. We don't want to have a smaller pool. We want to have a larger pool. And competition is the best thing to have the best talent. When they're saying we don't want you to apply, we're saying no one should be denied equal opportunity. In Canada, we have equal opportunity. You're not going to be turned away because you wear a turban. You're not going to be turned away because you wear a kippah. You're not going to be turned away because you wear hijab or a cross. This is about saying everyone is treated equally with equal opportunity in this country, and Brampton stands proudly for our mosaic and our diversity. So on that note, Councillor Dillon, then Councillor Santos and Fortini on the motion on the screen. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think anybody can deny what happened in, or what's happening in Quebec is atrocious. I think it goes against the basic rights that are offered in Canada. I heard the word introspection as well, and that kind of got my radar up a little bit as well, and so I'm a little bit conflicted today. I'm not conflicted in supporting the residents of Quebec against Bill 21. I'm conflicted on if we've done enough for our own residents. We're talking about ads in Quebec, but how much have we done for our own ethnic media here? How much have we done in terms of our own inclusiveness and equity here? How much have we done in terms of our own policies for diversity? I was on a diversity and equity committee last term, and there was nothing accomplished. I think we did a survey, and essentially what that is a head count. Well, what in terms of policy are we actually doing? And 100%, I think we need to support whatever legal challenge is taking place in Quebec. But we should show solidarity through accountability. And while also supporting them, we make sure our own house is in order. And I think that's such a great sign of solidarity. There's parents have come up to me as a Sikh, as the only Sikh councillor last term, and I'm joined by Councillor Singh this term, but a lot of them have said, why can't our kids get jobs in the city? Are our kids second-class citizens? And so this is where I'm conflicted in that we're supporting a motion that says advertise in Quebec and support the people of Quebec, which I think is good. But how much have we supported our own diverse community here? I've heard we're ground zero, we're the most diverse city, we have to stand up. But what are we really doing for our own community, which is what I'm asking today. And so, obviously I'm a very visible minority. I couldn't get a job in the public sector in Quebec. I couldn't get a job in fire department here because of my headgear. And so I think there's a lot of work that we have to do going forward, and showing support to them is an excellent first step, but I think an excellent second step, or even 1A and 1B, would be to move something today that shows the Quebec citizens that we're also taking, we're also taking a stand against discriminatory processes and actions and discriminatory behavior. And so I have some amendments I'm hoping the clerk can put them up for the for council and for anybody who's watching. And I'll read it out to you. And if there's any discussion, I hope that I can get some, there'll be some comments around the table, and I hope I can get support for this as well. So, Mr. Clerk, can you put it up? So, whereas the government of Quebec has passed Bill 21 prohibiting the wearing of religious symbols by individuals in positions of authority, and whereas the City of Brampton believes in the values of diversity and inclusion, including the accommodation of religious symbols, I've added, whereas the City of Brampton must become a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, therefore it be resolved that the City of Brampton invite affected individuals either pursuing or training for a career in different municipal services, including fire and emergency, to consider a career with the City of Brampton, that the City of Brampton produce and place select local advertising within ethnic media outlets located within Brampton, and targeted social media advertisements in Quebec promoting career opportunities in the City of Brampton that highlight diversity as our strength in the city. That 3, staff immediately initiate a review and or equity audit of City of Brampton hiring practices, race relations, promotional practices, anti-discrimination policies, equity employment, diversity, gender issues, and employee misconduct procedures and policies to determine the sufficiency of actions to be taken and for any areas of improvement. B, that a neutral third-party facilitator or consultant should be retained to conduct the review and or equity audit and to provide options and recommendations to this audit. That the terms of reference to be determined at a later date. And so these are some amendments I'm putting forward. I think this is an excellent first step for us to not only show solidarity, but take accountability for ourselves and get our own house in order. And so the amendments are on the screen, and give it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Dillon. A few quick points. We, as a council, passed a motion about a month ago wanting more cultural advertising, cultural communication, and by a vote of all members present, staff, Jason Taman, our communications director, was assigned to come up with a plan so that when there's a job posting, when there's an opportunity, not only do we advertise it in the Brampton Guardian, we advertise it in some of our cultural media reflecting the diversity. I've been told from staff that report's coming back to council on July 10th. And so you're actually going to get a full slate of options for how to support that enhanced advertising. Now there's a price tag with it, but council will get to choose on July 10th. I know that was something that's important to council. So I think this is, number 2 is consistent with what is already happening, but to say that this ad should be placed in Brampton and in Quebec, of course, I would support that as a friendly amendment. I've been advised by the clerk that item 3 is a separate item, so I'm going to get the clerk to explain that for council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the purpose of today's council meeting was called for 4 purposes, of one of which 3 relate to closed session business, for which the current item under debate does not relate. But the purpose of the meeting for which the discussion item right now is matters regarding the Government of Quebec's Bill 21 prohibiting the wearing of religious symbols by individuals in positions of authority. Once a special meeting is called, it is called for a special purpose, and if there's something urgent or unique that has to be discussed. But once that meeting is called, no other business can be added to the meeting, and that's under the principle that those participating or those interested in the meeting should have notice in terms of the matters that are to be discussed by council. So while the proposals in part 3 of this proposed motion are important, they are not directly related to the matter that is before council today. So my advice through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor is there is a council meeting scheduled for July 10th, and it may be appropriate to consider those motions at that point in time.
Mr. Mayor, do I still have the floor?
Yes, and I would just say, Councillor Dillon, so the first one we can accept as a friendly, and in terms of the second one, we're already embarking upon that, and council will get an update. So number 2 is a friendly, but number 3, the equity audit, we're in the process of speaking to companies that do that, and council will get an update on that and the cost associated with it. And secondly, the advertising, council already passed the advertising motion.
Sorry, to you, Mr. Mayor, as well. I was on the equity, Inclusion and Equity Committee last term of council. At no time did we pass to have an audit done. I believe there's a survey that's being taken place, and I think in terms of what Mr. Clerk said, I think this is absolutely relevant and absolutely related to the discussion that we're speaking today. We're taking a step to show solidarity to the people of Quebec, and I think, as I mentioned, what better than taking accountability for our own processes and policies and showing that we do respect our diverse population here. And so that is my opinion. I think it is relevant. I think it relates to it. And I don't think council has ever passed that we ask for a full review or an audit.
So, Councillor Dillon, when we did something similar at the region with the equity of the police, and that's been a very healthy process. We asked Joe if he could look at that.
Yeah,
I've met some of the firms that do that, and council will get an update on July 10th.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
But maybe we'll have Joe just speak to this briefly.
Just before that, this is the same motion that was passed by the Peel Regional Police to request an audit done.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, just to clarify things, the City of Brampton has already retained CCDI over a year ago, and the scope of their work was to conduct a current state inclusivity assessment of the city's diversity and inclusion profile in terms of our demographic diversity, our inclusion climate, and the level of maturity of its diversity, of our diversity profile and inclusion standards and practices. The aim of that assessment focuses on identifying accomplishments, our gaps, our areas of opportunity, and recommendations that will help us as a city develop our inclusion and diversity experiences, strategies, and practices. Much of that work included some substantial engagement, which includes the survey that Councillor Dillon had identified. This work is being reviewed right now. Draft reports are being developed, and is the expectation, and as I've told Council previously, the expectation is to bring it to you this fall.
And we can get an update on July 10th, but this is the same firm that did do it with the Peel Police.
The thing is this, I've been hearing this for about 5 years now, that we're doing something. Every time we have a council meeting, we always talk about our diversity. I know it off by heart. We have 89 languages. We have hundreds of thousands of people. We have hundreds of different cultures and languages. I think this is an opportunity now where we're also addressing something on a national level. We're showing leadership in that. But if we're showing leadership on a national level as to what's going on in Quebec, I think we need to start showing leadership to our local residents as well. And it begins by giving an opportunity to some of those ethnic media outlets. It begins by giving confidence to the parents I speak to that their children have an opportunity to get a job here. And so I think it's the will of council, from what I understand. It's the will of council to see if this goes forward, even though it is a special council meeting. And I think if we have to get 2/3 to add it, I'm hoping that we can get it added, but this is an actual audit that we're asking for, that I'm requesting. It's different than what the scope of what you just said was, Joe. And so in my opinion, this is actual substance that we're asking for. You know, we do flag raising ceremonies. It's great. We do cultural celebrations, which is also great. But I don't think we've done anything of relevance or something that has actually impacted the opportunities, increased the opportunities for people of our diverse population to get employment in the city of Brampton. You know, I hear it all the time. Why can't my kids even get a job in Parks and Rec to cut the grass? And so it's these types of conversations that I've had. It's the conversation that we're having about Quebec now that I think we need to make some important steps. And I think today's a good day to take these steps.
So, Councillor, I don't think anyone is disagreeing with you. I think what staff is saying is they've hired that firm, and I've had the benefit of a briefing from staff, but I think it would be helpful for all of council to have that briefing, and we can accommodate that July 10th. But, you know, in terms of, has this ever happened before in the last 5 years? Has the city retained an equity audit before to the CEO?
To you, Mr. Mayor, the answer is no. The retention of CCDI happened over a year ago, as I said, and I just wanted to provide that context and clarity in terms of the scope that was included. What I can do for July 10th is to go back, talk to our HR team as well as CCDI to see whether or not what is being proposed by Councillor Dillon is in fact their interpretation of what is in the scope, or if it's not, what would be required and the costs associated
and
to that.
Maybe the contract we have with CCDI we could share with council.
Yes.
And I would just say the work they did with Peel Police was very impressive, and those on the regional level will note that the recommendations were quite substantive. So I'm just going to, I know we've had different interpretations. I'm going to get the clerk just to clarify one more time. Can we do this today, or should it be on July 10th?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my advice is part 3. It should be ruled out of order as it's not directly germane to the subject that is the purpose of today's special meeting.
So have we had direction from council to have an audit, a diversity audit or an equity audit to this point, last term or this term?
Through the chair,
Councillor Pleshy, point of order.
Has there been a ruling on whether this is before us? Yes or no?
So I take the advice of the clerk on procedural matters. So that means I would take number 2 as a friendly amendment, and number 3, we can we'll get the report from the CEO, and if we need to adjust the equity audit that the city's already engaged, we can do so on July 10th.
So the reason why I'm speaking is to get clarification on the merits of this amendment.
The mayor has made a ruling, so all that is required now is the mayor can be challenged, the ruling can be challenged, or we move on. That is under council's procedural rules. We cannot debate the item. A ruling has been made.
I won't challenge it, but I'm speaking as a person who, if I lived in Quebec right now, I would be affected by Bill 21. My perspective is a little bit different than everybody else's around the table, and so out of respect for the motion, I will leave it. But I do think, and I'll let it be clear again, I do think it's appropriate that this should have been added to, so these amendments should have been added to the motion. And so, you know, I'm speaking on behalf of all those people who are in Quebec right now. I couldn't be elected in Quebec right now. I couldn't be a school teacher in Quebec right now. I couldn't drive a bus in Quebec right now. Neither could my children. I'd have to leave Quebec. And what better example could we give people in Quebec who we're showing solidarity to, that, you know, we got our own house in order, that we're taking the right steps here too, that Quebec isn't taking. And so if you think it's out of order, I disagree with you. I won't belabor the point, but I think there's some merit to what I am saying today. I am disappointed, and I'm not trying to take away from a really good news story, but I've been here 5 years, and I've seen so much. I've seen the flag raisings, I've seen everything else, but I'm looking forward to July 10th. I'll bring this to council, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a discussion there, but we'll be able to make some positive.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon.
Sorry, and I think
I'm being advised by the clerk that we have to
speaking on something really important here. I'm sorry if I'm ruining a good PR day for everybody.
Well,
but this is important.
So Councillor Dillon,
these are important points that I'm making.
Councillor Dillon, we're trying to explain to you that what you've asked for, the city has actually done, and so
it's not been done.
So you haven't had the benefit of a briefing on the contract, and we'll make sure you get that briefing. But exactly what you're asking for was been engaged, and in terms of the advertising motion that you brought up, you actually voted for that motion, Councillor Dillon, and we appreciate your support.
There's not been an audit that's been moved or passed by council.
So, Councillor Dillon, we have the contract, and we'll get you a copy, and you should be happy to know that what you're asking for has already been done.
Okay,
so
thank you.
What I'd ask is we don't try to I use my words carefully, but when you've already got when the city's already doing what you wish, we shouldn't make a suggestion to anyone here that that's not happening, because that's not.
And I'll say it again,
that's not
what
not
the CAO
accurate.
outlined is not the same as what an audit is.
That's actually the contract, Councillor Dillon. So we'll get you a copy so you can understand. Next item, Councillor Fortini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I understand what Councillor Dillon's saying, and I was here the last 4 years. The motion, I'm fine with it. You know, we're setting an example, but I'm looking at where it says on number 1, to consider a career with the city of Brampton. And now I'm going back to Councillor Dillon. We have many people here in Brampton, Mississauga, all around the GT area, and saying that to come here when we don't have our house in order. And I think we should look at our people first and see what we have. And if there is openings, I don't see why not. But when we're trying to tell people to come and get a career into Brampton, and we're leaving our people out, I kind of don't like that little sentence. Either that, I'm fine with the motion, and I just don't like. I want to separate number 1 with number 2, because I don't consider inviting a career from out of town to come into Brampton when we have our own people here. Thank you.
So you'd ask for a separation of items 1 and 2. So we'll vote on those separately. Councillor Vicente. Oh, sure. One second.
I hope I'm not out of order, just for asking for clarification of the CAO. The city has engaged with a company, you say CCDI, to perform exactly what? I just need to hear it again.
Through the mayor, CCDI, which is the Canadian Centre for Diversion and Inclusivity, we contracted with them over a year ago to do a current state inclusivity assessment of the city's diversity and inclusion profile, which includes our demographic diversity, inclusion, climate, and the level of maturity of our diversity and inclusion standards and practices. The aim of the assessment or the work that they're doing is focusing on identifying our accomplishments to date, our gaps, areas for opportunity, and recommendations that will help us as a city develop our diversity and inclusion experiences, strategies, and practices.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the CAO. This was undertaken more than a year ago. Therefore, at what point did staff get direction to do that?
Through you, Mayor, I would have to go back and look at the records to determine where that direction arose from.
So, but it's safe to say that that direction came from the previous term of council?
That is correct.
And it's been undergoing for more than a year?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank Councillor Dillon for making those amendments because, and I know Councillor Fortini expressed the same, it is important that we do recruit the best, and I know we do advertise across Canada, and I think this is really important, symbolic that we do target Quebec in this capacity, notwithstanding, but I thank you, Councillor Dillon. And it's, I also sat on the diversity committee 4 years ago. My perception was that there is a lot of engaged people in the city of Brampton and who really understand diversity in a different way, in a different concept. And I think it's important when we talk about career opportunities, our socioeconomic issues. That's how a lot of people, I guess, experience their acceptance of diversity. They feel that they have opportunity the same opportunities others have. So I just want to recognize Councillor Dillon's passion. I can never pretend to walk in his shoes and face what he faces, and I think the fact that he's brought this amendment regarding ethnic media, I think is very relevant, it's very pertinent, and it's also prudent, and it also is all-encompassing, because I know also a lot of our ethnic media, which is produced right here, goes to the ethnic communities in Quebec. So there is all these ties here. But thank you very much for everyone's leadership on this, and Councillor the Mayor and Councillor Santos for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Medeiros. And just to highlight, one of the reasons I viewed this as friendly is this is the way, as a friendly amendment, as this is the way we should be treating all the cities' announcements and tendering and job postings. And that's why Council voted 11-0 on this communications report, so that we do advertising and communication in a multitude of languages utilizing our cultural advertising. So for this one, we have to do a one-off and specify that we use ethnic media outlets. But going forward, if we adopt the report on July 10th, it will be for all our efforts. And so I want to thank Council for their leadership a month ago when you voted for this unanimously. Next up, Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to echo some of the things that Councillor Medeiros said. I appreciate Councillor Dillon's amendment, specifically with respect to the ethnic media outlets. And I have a couple of things to highlight, because with ethnic media outlets, I believe, as much as I know, especially within the Punjabi community and other ethnic communities, radio shows, TV shows, newspapers actually span across the entire country. And so it's not just concentrated in Brampton. And so I imagine that, the various ethnic communities in Quebec who read ethnic papers, who listen to ethnic radio stations, will also hear and see the same advertising promoting the diversity that we have in our city. I also wanted to point out that one of the other amendments we did from the first motion was to make sure we included Brampton in there as well, making sure that this advertising is also to the residents of Brampton as well, and not just specifically to Quebec. And one final thing I wanted to note was the highlight and the promotion of the City of Brampton having diversity as our strength. This is about highlighting the fact that Brampton is a leader in the country when it comes to diversity and addressing diversity. It's not necessarily just about career opportunities. It's showing diversity as our strength. And when you highlight that and you talk to businesses and companies around the world, they're looking for places like Brampton that differentiates itself based on things like diversity as our strength. And so when you pull that all together, the reality is that this particular motion, it goes beyond just promoting the career opportunities and diversity in our city. It goes across the entire country, and it specifically targets the fact that the City of Brampton is a leader on diversity. So I hope that fellow councillors will support the motion as amended, and thank you, Councillor Dillon, for putting in the amendment, because those ethnic media channels will also reach residents in Quebec.
Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, speaking to this motion right now, right here, I am very supportive of this. I think it sends a strong message and signal that you're safe in Brampton and that we accept you in Brampton, so I think it's a positive message. I also like the amendment for ethnic media. And speaking on, I guess, the audit or whatnot, that's coming back on July 10th, correct? And so there we'll look at how this all started and what the difference is between an audit and this, and maybe where the gaps are, if we could highlight that as well, so we can make a more informed decision about maybe we do need an audit, correct? And so we'll have that information in front of us, because, it's nice to see council is passionate about diversity and equity. Nobody can take that away today in particular. So it's a good thing to see, and we look forward to that information and some attention to maybe where the gaps are and how it all started would be very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I just have a question about the hiring process. So when we hire here in Brampton for anything, do we give special consideration for people who live in the city?
Through the chair, no, not specifically. However, I will let council and many of those that are listening and watching, a significant majority of the resumes we receive are from Brampton residents. A significant majority. Okay.
So, I wonder, advertising in Quebec for jobs here, because we do need an audit, we do need to look at our practices. I think it's just pretty obvious it's something we have to do. If they come here, they may hit the same barriers that many people in Brampton hit trying to find jobs as well, right? So, we have to do an audit. So I'm really I'm happy that we're going to be looking into that. And I know Rome wasn't built in a day, and changing people's habits and belief systems take time. So an audit is absolutely going to help jumpstart that and encourage it. So as the motion stands, I do support this motion, and I think, we are an open door city, and we want to encourage people to come here and look for work and look for opportunity. But in the same light, we do need to do the audit. We have to look at how we do things here in our hiring processes and look for our own areas where we have barriers, because it's going to affect anybody coming into Brampton anyway. So that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And just to say, no one is saying no to a diversity and equity audit. It was when this came up at the region, and I asked the CEO about it and the senior staff, they said absolutely. We're actually using the same company. Everyone's on the same page. There's no debate about that. There's no convincing. We don't need to arm twist staff on this. They've actually been taking a leadership on it, recognizing that we all want to do better on that. Councillor Dillon, and then Councillor Paleshi.
Right. So I'm just going to clarify one thing, that it might be the same company, but from what I'm understanding is different things that we're asking for. And so part of the review and or audit, for example, that the Peel region did, what I was asking for is a review of hiring practices, which I didn't hear, race relations, promotional practices, anti-discrimination policies, equity, employment, diversity, gender issues, officer misconduct procedures and policies. And so these are some of the things that I was asking for. And so I just wanted to clarify that as well, because what the CAO had said was not that. Thank you.
Did the CEO want to respond to that? I know we're off topic, but we should give the CEO an opportunity.
In respect to Councillor Paleshi's point of order earlier, and given the ruling from the mayor, I don't believe it's appropriate for me to respond here. This, as directed by council today, will bring back on July 10th the gaps between what Councillor Dillon is requesting in terms of scope and in terms of what's currently in the CCDI scope, and we can have that fulsome discussion.
And just to say to Councillor Dillon, I've had the benefit of having a full briefing on this, and that I think council will be impressed by the seriousness that staff is taking this. And if there needs to be any additional scope added, I'm sure there would be support for that. All you're getting is a resounding yes from staff, and that's what I got when I brought this up from them previously. Councillor Paleshi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to the question to the mover or the seconder or the amending mover. So I have family in Quebec. I have an aunt, uncle, cousins that live in Charlevoix. My aunt is Catholic. My aunt wears my grandmother's cross around her neck. With the advertising within ethnic media outlets located in Brampton, targeted social advertisements in Quebec, does this get to her? Will she see this? I'm kind of talking to anybody that can answer it. If you can. Or are we not targeting her?
Sure, Councillor Dillon.
So if you're speaking to the amendment, what I've asked for is, actually, when we speak about diverse community, it's not just looking at your ethnicity. It's people who have accessibility issues. It's people who are part of the LGBTQ community. And so you brought up a great point as well. maybe we can even add, expand the scope of ethnic media to include diverse media. We can probably change that because when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, it's not just what you look like. It could be, you know, we just had the Pride Parade, I believe, on Saturday, so it could be your sexual preference. It could be so many different things. And so you bring up a great point. And so where we say ethnic media, we could say, you know, have it speak to diverse media. And so when we're talking about social media in Quebec, you can target a specific group. And so through Facebook, for example, and so the groups that I did list, you could target all of them to see, to let them know that Brampton, you know, Brampton is about diversity.
So I guess if I still have the floor, Mr. Mayor, I guess in you know the base of this motion and what we're here to discuss in Bill 21 and religious freedoms and civil liberty, and I realize that we're talking about diversity and inclusion, but it's really around religious symbols, and even though you know they're intertwined, what we're trying to, I think, accomplish here in getting the wording out is to all people, and to be inclusive. What's more inclusive than maybe changing the wording about the media outlets to read something like to all media outlets? So if maybe I can just request that be an amendment to the amendment of the motion.
Sorry, if I may respond, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Dillon.
I think diverse kind of, if you say all, it might get expensive. We're talking about the diverse communities that we're focusing. So diverse might be a good replacement for ethnic. All might be a little bit too broad. And so, because obviously we do advertising, as I believe the CAO said, to different parts of the country. And so I guess what the point of the original motion was to show our support of the diverse community and that we are accepting of people of different diverse backgrounds, that I think it'd only be appropriate that you focus the advertising of this in Quebec to those communities, whoever they may be, that are affected. And so maybe I missed somebody out. I apologize, but there's a number of them. We can get a whole bunch of a list of those people who are affected and even broaden that if may be, and then we could focus or target the advertising towards them.
Okay, so I think that you know, it's the more we talk about this, I think and we're talking about some funding now that is associated with this, because we're going to open it up, and I'd really even like to open it up to the possibilities of universities and colleges. And you know, when the mayor talks about the talent pool, and there's huge opportunity there. So maybe this is something that needs to. I know there's lots of support for this here today, but I don't know what that looks like anymore. I don't want to leave anybody out. I want to be inclusive. So next steps, I'm not sure. I look for your guidance, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, last speaker, Councillor Dillon.
I just want to respond by saying that we could probably find a list of communities that are directly affected by Bill 21 and focus on those. We don't have to necessarily spend millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think you can do it pretty cheap if you go through Facebook. And so, but I'll leave it to the mayor as to how we want to proceed with your recommendations for amendments.
I think the amendment with Councillor Dillon's wordsmithing here is broad enough to give the communications department the ability to place an ad that would reach those affected. So, no other speakers? Do you want to record a vote? Yes. Okay, record a vote.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, recorded vote's been requested, and specifically on Clause 1 and Clause 2 separately. So on Clause 1, as shown on the screen, all in favor of the motion. Clause 1 only, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor of Clause 1 is Councillor Dillon, Councillor Singh, Councillor Williams, Councillor Medeiros, Mayor Brown, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Willens, Councillor Vicente, Councillor Santos. All opposed to the motion, please stand to be counted. Showing opposed is Councillor Fortini. Mr. Mayor, Clause 1 carries 9-1 with 1 absence. A recorded vote's been requested on the second clause as amended and shown on the screen. All in favor of the clause, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Dillon, Councillor Singh, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Williams, Councillor Medeiros, Mayor Brown, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Willens, Councillor Vicente, and Councillor Santos. Mr. Mayor, that motion carries unanimously 10-0.
Okay. Thank you for the fulsome debate on this topic of Quebec's Bill 21. We now move on in the agenda to correspondence. We've received 5.1. Yes. Do we have a motion here to receive the correspondence? Yes, here it is. Moved by Councillor Vicente and Councillor Willens to accept the correspondence to be received. All those in favor? Motion carries. Public question period. Okay. Sylvia Roberts.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I'm a resident of Ward 3. I noticed that council has repeatedly used the term ground zero to refer to Brampton. If I may ask, why are we using a term associated with the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers, nuclear weapons, and occasionally the epicenter of earthquakes and epidemics? Why are we using that to refer to Brampton?
So I just say I think that term is used much more broadly than those specific incidents. Ground zero for Raptors fans is also Jurassic Square. It can be used in any context. But any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on from public question period to bylaws. And then we go to the closed session. Okay. So we'll go straight to the closed session. This is for information explicitly supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board of Canada, province, or territory, or the Crown Agency, or any of them, and the security of property of the municipality or local board. This is also for labor relations or employee negotiations, position or plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied. So 5 minutes? Oh.
So we say 10 minutes?
So I need a motion to go into close. Moved by Councillor Medeiros, seconded by Councillor Fortini. All those in favor? 10 minutes? In our closed session, 8.1, a direction was given and a public motion. This was moved by here. So okay, Councillor Medeiros, second by Councillor Fortini. All those in favor? Motion carries. 8.2, a direction was given, and do we have a motion? No motion, okay. 8.3, position, plan, procedure, criteria, instruction, and we have a motion. Okay. Moved by Councillor Medeiros, seconded by Councillor Santos. All those in favor? Motion carries. Okay. Confirming bylaw. To confirm proceedings of the special council meeting of June 26th. This is moved by Councillor Willen, seconded by Councillor Vicente. All those in favor? Motion carries. Now we have adjournment Our next meeting is July 10th, 2019, 9:30 a.m. And this is moved by Councillor Willen, seconded by Councillor Vicente. All those in favor, motion carries. And I got your charger here, Mark.
Oh, yeah.